found that it is an exquisite representation of the circumscribed tetrahedron in the rotating sphere. I mean, what more does one need to get one really asking, what did they know and when did they know it? So there we are, before dawn, after dawn, at noon, scrambling up and down this structure, the one right here. This is the Pyramid of the Sun, and this is obviously a helicopter shot, so you're seeing the Pyramid of the Moon projected behind it. Robin and I trekking all the way up here in the dark, freezing cold. She was trying to take notes in the dark, and her fingers were so cold that she couldn't write with the pen. Now, that doesn't really show up on camera. The fact that she looked a little blue, that should be a clue, but we got to the top, and we're there with Jaime Maussan. Now, the other thing I didn't like about the special is it didn't go into Jaime's extraordinary broadcast journalism credits. It basically said, oh, this is the UFO guy from Mexico. Jaime is anchor, or was anchor, for the equivalent of CBS 60 Minutes in Mexico on, I think it's Azteca, which is the major Mexican network, for decades. He had done an extraordinary series on Teotihuacan, investigating all of the measurements and the mythology and the history and all that, which he sent me, and I sent those DVDs on to the producers in New York. Not one mention that he was probably the world's best expert in Teotihuacan based on his journalism inquiries, having nothing to do with guys up there. But of course, television has a spin. When you watch television, the first thing you have to say to yourself, as Gene Roddenberry told me, is, what are they trying to sell you? That's the first question you should ask when you watch television. Once you ask that question, then you can watch what they are trying to sell you and calibrate it against the other stuff that you need to put into the equation. So there we are on this. By the way, I used to have a fear of heights. Anyway, so there we are, measuring. Here's the little gadget we're using to measure. This is the little accutron, which is basically on a sensor designed by my friend Bill Alec. We're measuring this using the laptop to basically record all the data, and this is how it works. The accutron was, as Bulova said back in '65 when they invented this thing, the first revolutionary advance in timekeeping in 300 years. And the reason for that was, instead of having a spring-wound escapement where things go click, 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 it had a little tuning fork located right here. And the tuning fork vibrates back and forth at 360 cycles per second. Here's a better view. And what happens is the frequency standard set by the tuning fork is then used to run the escapement, to turn the hand so you can actually read time. Well, this was all very well and good until NASA quietly discovered that the accutron was not very accurate. When they had put it into their spacecraft, they even had Scott Carpenter holding a watch up on his wrist on the cover of Perry Match magazine back in the 60s. And then a few months later, NASA quietly took all the accutrons out of their spacecraft, never telling anybody. Decades later, I figured out the problem. The problem is this. This is a frequency plot. Time is this way. Frequency is this way. By the way, high frequencies are down on the graph. Low frequencies are up. Don't ask me why they wrote the program that way. I didn't write it, but I just use it. And sometimes I flip it upside down so that up is up and down is down. So every time you see a down squiggle, it means a higher frequency, and an up squiggle means a lower frequency. Well, look at the accutron. It's not constant at all. And when you see some actual numbers here in a moment, you're going to see how imprecise and inconstant it is. That was a stunning, stunning clue to how this could be used as a sensor. Here's the data. This is the Pyramid of the Sun, where Robin and I were at dawn, and this is the dawn measurements. Look, the standard is 360. That's roughly what it is. It went up to 454, then it went up to 465, just at sunrise, as the Earth is tangential to the rising sun, rotating on a rotating planet, aligned, etc., the frequency went spoing, and as you can see, it had all kinds of structure. And it did it twice, first here and then here. Now, without laboratory baseline, without comparative, we should actually do this a lot of mornings in a row. We'll get Robin some warmer clothes, maybe gloves. But this is an amazing reading, given that, remember, under standard physics, under standard Newtonian or relativistic equations, nothing like this should be happening. That little tuning fork should be vibrating back and forth, very happy at 360 cycles per second, humming along, not changing at all. The fact that on the top of the pyramid of the sun at dawn, this thing went crazy, to me, was one of those eureka, aha moments. And wouldn't it have been nice if this graph had made it into the special? I think the reasoning there was, it's too complex for general audience. This is why television is both your friend and not your friend. And again, here's the tuning fork itself. Now, there's only two ways to change the frequency of that tuning fork. One is if you somehow change the current in those little magnets, make the current stronger, it'll vibrate faster. Make the current weaker, it'll vibrate slower. There's nothing that would change the current sitting on top of a pile of stone in the middle of nowhere at a place called Teotihuacan. The other is if the mass of the tuning fork itself, the inertia, the resistance to being pushed, which is the definition of mass, changed. And that, of course, is a total revolution. Now we go to Tikal. Look at what we got at Tikal. I'm sitting up here. I climbed a lot of pyramids in this trip, lots of pyramids. I'm sitting up here, and all hell is breaking loose. Look at the change. 65 to 1 frequency shift. The lowest frequency was down around 14, 15 cycles per second. Remember, this is for a little thing that wants to vibrate at 360. There's even a transistorized feedback circuit designed to try to help it stay at 360. And that circuit completely is blown away by the changes of the mass of the tuning fork. Now, the reason this is so important is because the back and forth motion of a tuning fork is essentially rotation. And the crucial part, which they did not put in, Rebecca did not for some reason put it in, and I gave her lots and lots of sound bites, and I'm sure I said it several different ways, is that if that little tuning fork mass can change, sitting on top of a pyramid in Mexico, in obligation to the first three laws of hyperdimensional torsion physics, rotation, 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 then obviously it means that a rotating system such as the Earth itself is also subject to mass and inertia changes in terms of its rotation. That right there sets up the stage, sets up the backdrop for the possibility that indeed on 2012 or thereabouts, under the appropriate background hyperdimensional torsion field conditions, the motion of the Earth could be interrupted and could in fact change in a very dramatic way. The science does not preclude that now. It opens that doorway. Now, given that I was supposed to be the doom and gloom guy, you would think that they would have wanted to make that point really clear. Back to the physics of how this works. This is, of course, a projection of the precessional plot. It shows you, in fact, how the world rotates and revolves around the sun, and over this 26,000-year period, how it also wobbles. It's called precession, and it produces this celestial panorama in the sky where the north pole of the Earth is aimed at different constellations in the course of this 26,000 years. Now, the key part of all this is that we're in a galaxy with 400 billion stars, all of which have a torsion field, including the big guy, the 4 million solar mass black hole, if that's what it is, living at the center of the galaxy. The solar system also has various objects. This alignment, this resonant alignment, if in fact you propose that there are some unseen guys out here which get into just the right position to contribute their part in the frequency pattern, that could be the cliche is the straw that breaks the camel's back. In fact, if those things